Welcome to Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
How to survive camping. This land is special. I run a private campground. I have a set of rules to keep everyone safe. But sometimes, even if you follow them, something awful happens anyway. These creatures are fickle. They don't all follow the same rules or any rules at all. And the land is turning ancient, and everything is changing. No resolution on the harvesters yet. I like to think they know I'm angry at them and are hiding from me. If you're new here, you should really start at the beginning. There's a playlist below and some very helpful links. I ran into one of my aunts. The blood tie is a bit more removed, and I don't know what her technical relationship is, but I've always known her as Aunt. I was leaving the town hall after another fruitless morning of searching the records room when she found me. My brother wasn't along that day as he had other commitments, so I was alone, an easy target. I think she might have been waiting for me as she made it across the parking lot before I could reach my car and escape. I'm not sure how she could have done that unless she was hiding in a bush and waiting for me to come out or something. "Kate, dear, it's so good to see you," she said. "It's been a while since there's no grocery store for us to bump into each other each week now." Okay, is that a slight? Her tone of voice was perfectly friendly, but was that a passive aggression that just flew over my head? I'll be honest. I think since I'm used to outright aggression from things trying to kill me, that I can't distinguish the pettier form of aggression. I carried on as if nothing was wrong. Oh, sure, it was sad to not come into town every week to see her and everyone else. I hated going to the other town for groceries, and this was true. It's a bit of a drive. She commiserated, saying she hated it too, but had heard recently that there were plans to rebuild the grocery. It would be lovely, she said, since it costs so much more to buy from the grocery in the next town. Not to mention the additional gas money. I forced a smile and said that was nice, expecting that she was here to hit me up for money. "I heard you're trying to take out the more dangerous creatures on the campground," she said instead. I didn't let my guard down. She could still ask for money. "I've had some success," I admitted. "I'm not sure how much the town knows of what's been going on around the campground. My staff tend to be fairly closed-mouthed about it. I think they just don't want to become a source of gossip, which is fair. And the ones that do gossip, well, I suspect the other inhabitants of the campground seek them out because they get weeded out one way or another pretty quickly." My aunt nodded at me and didn't say anything, clearly hoping I'd fill the silence with more detail. I reluctantly obliged, hoping that maybe a few tidbits would satisfy her and she'd let me go on my way. It was starting to get unpleasantly humid out. "I might have to do something about the the people in the raincoats. You know, the ones with no faces." "Oh, yes, those. Quite troublesome, aren't they?" Yeah, I'm pretty sure she had no clue what I was talking about. I have a pamphlet and everything, but that doesn't mean everyone in my extended family has any interest in reading it. As long as the creatures didn't escape my land, they didn't care. I just nodded vaguely, rather than elaborate, and took a step towards my car, hoping to escape. "You know, your mother had some peculiar ideas about the campground, too," she said. And that's how I wound up inviting her for some coffee at the only diner in town. It's certainly no Starbucks. You can get coffee with cream, or decaf. But buying her coffee seemed like the polite thing to do if she was going to give me information about my mother. "Your mother loved the campground more than anything," she said, once the pleasantries were over. "I sometimes wonder if that's why she married your father." That wasn't particularly helpful, so I waited and hoped she'd elaborate on why she felt compelled to tell me this. "She loved it more than she loved you." Oh, now that was a slight, I'm pretty sure. I gave her my best "I hate you" smile, and said through clenched teeth that I was sure that wasn't actually true. "Oh, but she used you as bait." Naturally, when someone says something outlandish about my family, I'm inclined to not believe them. It's not like I haven't heard such nonsense before. Not this specific bit of slander, but similar things. It's only to be expected when your family has a reputation mine does. To say nothing of our proximity to inhuman things. I mean, what kind of rumors do you think would spread about a family that has a little girl crying outside their window every night? "I don't remember this," I said dismissively. "It was when you were very little." She settled back in her chair, clearly prepared to tell a story. "Caused quite the scandal. I'm surprised your father didn't divorce her over it. Might have been better if he had. Then he wouldn't have gone the way he did. I suppose she justified it by saying she was trying to save lives." If she noticed how white my fingers were on the handle of my mug, she ignored it and plowed forward regardless. "It started with the child going missing from the nursery at the hospital," she said. "Back then they didn't have the sort of security they do now. So the police were called in and an officer was stationed at the door to the nursery while the investigation proceeded. A few days later, another child went missing, and the officer was found stuffed in a closet of cleaning supplies with his neck twisted twice around. My family was notified of the discovery. Everything eventually wound up on the campground after all. It was only a matter of time before the creature made its way there, and then it would be our responsibility. We could kill it or we could ignore it, so long as it stopped preying on the locals. It was entirely our decision. My aunt said that there was a heated discussion among the family what to do when it finally showed up. Some people wanted to leave it alone since it preyed on infants. We didn't have much to be concerned about. People didn't tend to bring very small children camping. That, of course, was based on the assumption it would seek larger prey. My father fielded both sides, quietly reminding people that this was his campground now, and they could speculate all they wanted, but the final decision would be his. In the end, my aunt said, my mother was the one that chose what to do. She said this in such a way that it implied that she was acting on her own, without consulting the family or even her own husband. I'm not so convinced. My parents always talked through how they wanted to handle campground matters together. My aunt was likely projecting due to entitled resentment that she and the rest of the family, having traditionally been shut out of the final decision-making on how to run the campground. Yes, this is an ongoing problem. It spans generations. Too many busybodies and not enough to do around here. My mother went into the woods, she said, and she took me with her. She wasn't content to wait for it to come around to the campground. These things move in a spiral. They circle the campground like water swirling around a drain, until they finally cross the borders. There was a very real possibility it would take other children as it slowly drew closer. There were other options, my aunt sniffed. They could have relocated any children in the expected path. She didn't have to risk her own child. As if these things are so predictable. I guess my mother took it personally. The monster was taking children, that is. After all, she had children of her own now, and knew what it was like to fear losing one of them. And when my mother was confronted with something that upset her, well, she was someone who didn't sit around. She dealt with it, violently, and by any means available. I felt a shiver run down my spine as my aunt recounted what she knew. I was young, but not so young that I couldn't remember this, she said. It was just a faint memory, perhaps, and if something jarred it loose, it would come back to me. I felt uneasy just listening to her talk, like my childhood self hovered at my shoulder, whispering fragments of what happened to me in my ear. My mother took me into the woods, daily, she said, for an entire day. We'd walk the breadth of the campground. Such a hardship to put on a young child, though, my aunt said disapprovingly. I remember making dolls out of sticks. I don't think we spent the entire day walking. There were no more disappearances in the hospital. Some of the locals reported seeing something walk past their windows at night. A tall, slouching creature that they could only see the shoulders and torso of as its shadow passed by. They hid in their homes and waited for dawn, as they should. They watched over their children uneasily and didn't sleep at night. And meanwhile, I played underneath the shade of the trees, oblivious to what was coming. My mother must have reasoned that the allure of a child on old land would be too tempting for the creature to pass up. She was right. A few days after she started taking me out into the woods, the creature arrived on the campground. Did anyone else watch the original War of the Worlds movie? My parents showed it to me when I was a child. Do you remember the part of the movie where the main characters are hiding in a house and the alien sends in this lens on the end of a long tube, like a periscope? That scene terrified me. I used to hide under my covers, terrified of it coming through my window. Yes, I know. Crying girl. Outside that violently kills anyone that lets her in? Fine. Normal. Old movie with aliens? Nightmare fuel. I'm starting to think perhaps it wasn't just that movie that gave me those particular nightmares. I remember feeling so certain that something was outside my window trying to get in. I remember hiding under the blanket and hearing its footsteps outside. It left before dawn. Our house is well protected. Generations have lived here. That morning, my mother took me into the woods. Then once we were in the thick of the woods, she left me alone. I don't have any particular memory of this, so I must not have thought it as strange. But as I sat there, alone, playing with my stick dolls, the monster came. I felt disoriented as my aunt spoke, like I was no longer at the diner. The scene from that movie came to my mind again, floating through my fragmented memory, like a paper boat in the ocean. That eye, peering into my bedroom, searching. It was real. It wasn't the imagination of a frightened child. I only remember its head and neck, a long neck, snaking around a tree, the flesh the color of a paper bag, the head with bulging eyes, 3 of them, grouped close together in the middle of its face. It stared at me, and its face parted, jaw sliding open to reveal a dripping maw. I remember hearing a child crying. I'm not certain if it was my own tears that I remember, or if the sound came from deep within its gaping throat. My body was rigid, like I was a child again, there in that diner, paralyzed with fear. Then my aunt said my mom appeared and hacked its head off with a long, sharp knife. Your mother was reckless, my aunt sniffed, while I sat there with a pounding heart. You're too much like her, you know. She spent too much time in the woods, like she was searching for something, and now you're doing the same thing. Is that what you wanted to talk to me about? I finally asked, shaking off the cobwebs of childhood terror and finding my voice again. To scold me? Oh, I'm just saying your mother wasn't as good a person as you think. And if you're not careful, you're going to wind up just like her. Dead? I snapped. Is that what you're referring to? She hemmed and hawed, but I knew what she was implying. My mother was searching for something in the woods, and that was the reason she died. Bullshit. I stood, my hands balled into fist, and rested on the table as I leaned over my aunt. Don't you ever talk bad about my mother, ever again, I said. Okay, Kate, sure. She wouldn't look me in the eyes, but her posture told me everything I needed to know. She would only honor that request in spirit. So I did the reasonable thing. I grabbed her empty cup of coffee and threw it at the wall. The shattering porcelain silenced the diner. All eyes in the room swiveled to stare at the brewing confrontation. I mean it, I hissed. I am my mother's daughter, and you know what she was capable of, don't you? Finally, my aunt paled, apologized. Then she hastily grabbed her purse and left, saying it was clear I wasn't interested in what she had to say. Everyone in the diner watched her go, and then slowly their attention politely returned to their meals. Guess I know what the town will be gossiping about for the next month or so. I don't really care. Authority and threats really isn't the best way to get someone to do what you want. In fact, it's really the worst way to do things. But it sure feels good sometimes. I didn't doubt that my aunt wouldn't stop gossiping and bad-mouthing my mother, and everything else she didn't like about how I ran the campground. I could only hope that now she'd do so with one eye checking behind her, to make sure the wrong person wouldn't overhear and tell me. If she is going to talk shit, she can do so scared. It bothered me, though, what she said about my mom, that she loved the land more than anything. I talked to my brother. I asked him what his relationship with our mother was like. He didn't want to answer. It's a painful subject for him as well. Finally, reluctantly, he told me that he always felt she was distant with him, that she had something more important that she was concerned about. When he was younger, he was jealous of the two of us. I was closer to Mom than he was. Then, as he got older, he realized that it was only because she was training me to take over the campground someday. There was a purpose behind her affection. It was uncomfortable to hear this, to think that my mother wasn't as emotionally attached to us as I thought, and that my memories of her attention were clouded by a child's naive longing. She wasn't a bad mom, my brother clarified awkwardly. It's just, she loved the campground. Just like I do. But I think my aunt has it wrong. She made it seem like that was a bad thing, like her love for the land damaged her love for everything else. We can love as many things as we want. I do not doubt that my mom loved us, perhaps a little differently than other mothers may, but I think she did love us very much. I'm a campground manager. This land is special. That is something I have heard over and over. I remember now. I remember my mom saying this. She said she'd tell me more when I was older. She said something else right after it. The land has a heart. This is what she was looking for. I know it. It has to be. I've been to every land inside of this land that I know, except the basement. I've been to the Hall of the Gummy Bears, to the Gray World, inside the Thing in the Dark, and the mass grave. The heart is not in any of these places. That leaves the basement. I wonder if my mom intended to destroy it. Her voice was hard when she said this, as it always was when she was going to do something she felt necessary. Terrible, but necessary. Would destroying the heart destroy the beast? Or would it destroy the campground? Turn it back into normal land again? I can't imagine my mom doing that. Not when she loved it so much. I don't know. I need to find it, though. And perhaps when I do, I'll understand why she sought it so desperately. So quoth this raven. Thank you so kindly for stopping by my chateau, my darlings. It does mean so much to me. Please, if you have not subscribed, as many of you have not, please do so. Give me a like so I know what you would like to hear. And comment. I always love to read your comments. And special thanks to my Patreon and membership supporters. Ciao, darlings.